I'm joined now by Sabrina Singh. Sabrina is the Deputy Press Secretary for Vice President Harris. Sabrina, welcome. Thanks very much for being with us.
Thanks, Elaine, for having me.
So we heard the Vice President's message to the AAPI community. What specifically are the next steps that the administration has identified to address anti-Asian hate?
Well, first, I just want to say that I think today was a somber day and I think an impactful day with the President and Vice President going down to Atlanta and meeting with Asian American groups and leaders and community activists within the community there. And I think the President and Vice President have been very clear that this administration is always going to be a partner to the AAPI community all across this country. And so that starts with speaking out against these attacks on our community. And then the next steps, as you mentioned, one of the things that the President did within the first, I think, 7 days of his administration was sign a presidential memorandum that not only condemned these hate crimes against Asian Americans, but also allowed for his Attorney General to make it easier for Asian Americans to come forward and to report these hate crimes. And he's also called for the passage of the COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act, which is currently introduced in the House and Senate by Senator Mazie Hirono and in the House by Congresswomen Grace Meng and Judy Chu. So that's a step. And I think the additional steps that this administration is going to be taking is always continuing to have an open line of communication with Asian Americans, whether that be through groups or activists or leaders in different state houses, to our Congress. We need, we know this is an issue that we are going to continue to address, and we want to have an open door to hear everyone because we are an administration that sees everyone.
Do you have reason to believe that that COVID hate crime bill would get bipartisan support?
Well, I truly hope so. As we've seen in the last year, I think there's been nearly 4,000 attacks against Asian Americans, whether it's violence, discrimination, whether it be rhetoric or physical attacks. So there's no question that something has to be done, and something has to be done now. And so I hope that—
Does the President or Vice President plan to do outreach for that bill?
Well, I think you saw outreach today with a meeting right here, right there in Atlanta. I'm not going to go into the details of that meeting, but I would not be surprised if they talked about that piece of legislation. And I think, of course, the Vice President and the President are always going to have, and not just them, this administration is going to have a door open for all of those who want to talk about ways that we can address these hate crimes, these discriminatory acts, no matter where they occur in our country.
But I mean, working in a bipartisan fashion, Sabrina.
Well, I mean, Elaine, I hope so. I mean, discrimination, racism, all lawmakers should be concerned about this. Democrat, Republican, Independent. These are your constituents that are being unnecessarily targeted because of the way they look, because of the way of their skin color. As the Vice President said today, xenophobia is real in America. Racism is real. Sexism is real. So I would implore those folks who are hesitant about supporting this bill to go back to their constituents and look at the people that they represent. Many of those people that they represent in those districts or in their states are Asian American, and they deserve to be protected by our country and by our government.
I wonder, Sabrina, is this complicated, this effort made more complicated due to the fact that some in the AAPI community feel very strongly that the rhetoric of the previous administration contributed to this climate that has led to the kind of violence that we have seen over the course of this year? Is that a complicating factor here?
Well, look, I think the facts are very clear. We had people from the previous administration or in offices, here that, and I won't repeat the slogans that they used to characterize the coronavirus, but they used their highest powers in office to alienate and discriminate against the Asian American community. And so I don't think you can't look past the facts when you see an uptick in the last year since, I think 2020 of nearly 4,000 attacks, racial discriminatory attacks against Asian Americans. So I would hope that, people look into those reports, they look into the groups tracking these discriminatory attacks, and they realize that our communities, our Asian Americans all around the country are our Americans, are our friends, are our neighbors, and they deserve our protection as well.
You mentioned the Attorney General earlier. Now that Merrick Garland has been confirmed as Attorney General, should we expect to see action soon from the Department of Justice in dealing with anti-Asian violence?
Well, that is a question for the Department of Justice. I think that Merrick Garland is going to be an incredible Attorney General. I think he has spoken out about these discriminatory attacks against our Asian American community. But the Justice Department is independent, and as it should be. And so I would hope that you would also ask them the same question.
And we certainly are going to do that. In the meantime, Sabrina, dozens of AAPI community groups have sent a letter to President Biden asking for $300 million to combat anti-Asian hate and violence. And I just want to read from an excerpt from it. It reads in part, quote, "It is open season on Asian American women and girls, transgender and gender nonconforming, undocumented and immigrant communities. Our Asian elders are not safe walking on the streets for fear of getting sliced, punched, shoved, kicked, and spit on. Our children endure bullying and are all but invisible in what they learn about in school." I realize the Vice President and the President were obviously traveling today and meeting with people in Georgia. But what's your response to this request? Is that something that the White House might take under consideration?
Well, I haven't seen the full contents of the letter, and I'm sure that's something that our White House and our administration will certainly review. But I think just to go off that point that you said at the end about Asian Americans, immigrants, feeling like they can't walk down the street without being targeted, that is something the president spoke to directly today. I mean, he said exactly that I want Asian Americans, our neighbors, our friends, our family members to feel safe here. And so I think that this administration is going to continue not only to engage with the Asian American community, but find ways in order to support our local law enforcement, our federal law enforcement, to make sure that any crimes, racially discriminatory, hate crimes are prosecuted and those people are held accountable.
Finally, Sabrina, Vice President Harris is, of course, the first Black and South Asian American to hold that position of Vice President. I just wonder how she learned of the shootings on Tuesday and what was her reaction?
We were traveling back from Denver, Colorado, and I think she must have seen, the reports on national news outlets about the attacks. And the horrible truth is that, as the president said, this was a mass shooting. I mean, we have 8 people that are dead, 7 people that are women, 6 that are Asian American. And so, this really hits home. This is personal, and I think this is not only personal for the vice president, but this is personal for the president. We want everyone of any race, any gender, any religion to feel like they have a home here in America, to feel that they are included here and that they always have a voice here in our administration. And so something that the vice president has always said at the end of our meetings when we have tough situations like this is we have to remind people that we see you. We see you from here in the White House. We see you and we want to represent you. We want to help you. We want to support you. And that's what we're going to continue to do for the Asian American community.
Sabrina Singh. Sabrina, thank you very much.
Thank you.